just so everyone is aware of that. And today we're going to be talking about privacy and all the different things that are going on out there, especially around GDPR, HIPAA, PCI-DSS, and state privacy laws. And what we will go through for that is we're going to do a quick overview of what personal identifiable information is. We will talk about HIPAA. We'll talk about PCI-DSS, GDPR. GDPR stands for General Data Protection Requirements. This is out of the EU. Give you a quick overview of what's going on with state privacy laws, and then talk about the things that the HigherGround platform does to make sure that people stay in compliance with these regulations, as well as how do we avoid disclosing personal identifiable information. So as there may be some others that join, but we will just kind of move along here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about personal identifiable information. Now, that means that it's any information that can be used on its own or with other information to identify, contact, or locate a single person, or to identify an individual within context. And this came directly out of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, and that includes name, social security, date, place of birth, mother's maiden name, biometric records, and any other information such as medical, educational, financial, employment information, which could be linked to you and actually build a profile to make you identifiable out in the marketplace, and that can be both written and or digital an environment. Now, just to give you an idea, there are a lot of different things that are out there that can be used as personal identifiable information. Some of this we deal with, some of it we don't. Now, there are things that through the course of doing what we collect, either through PSAPs or through contact centers, we may get face if there's any video involved. We may get social security number if that's been provided at a contact center, vehicle registration plate number, or driver's license numbers if they have actually been stated in a recording, credit card numbers, definitely in a contact center that involves merchandise or purchasing. Those are potentially can be collected by us. Telephone number is an absolute regardless, because we do collect automatic number identification, ANI, and CDR information that may be part of the overall solution for interaction collection. So these are the types of things that we look out for, and when we get to the end, we'll talk about how we can either avoid collecting that or protecting that. So the next area we want to cover is HIPAA. And in case you don't, everybody knows HIPAA but doesn't remember what it stands for, it's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It was co-signed in 1996. There are 5 sections, or titles, because this is a federal act, and the one that is most applicable to us is Title II, which is Preventing Healthcare Fraud and Abuse, Administrative Simplification, and then the Medical Liability Reform. Now, within that, what it does is it actually provides policies and procedures for maintaining privacy and security of individually identifiable health information. And it is very important that in this particular case, it's talking about the use and disclosure of protected health information in healthcare treatment, payment, and operations within the healthcare environment. Now, I know that one of our key partners, Spoke, deals predominantly in a healthcare environment, so HIPAA is very important to them, as is us. So Now, what in HIPAA is protected health information? It's quite a bit. It can be names, it can be geographical identifiers, dates, phone numbers, fax numbers, email addresses, medical record numbers, driver's licenses, any sort of information, web uniform URLs, IP address numbers, any of this stuff. This is all considered protected health information. Now, within that larger set of information, there's some things that our product does have the access to on a fairly regular basis. And that is things like names. And that might be names that people just speak to a person at a call center or contact center for a healthcare provider. Phone numbers are definitely information that we can pull up. There may even be fax numbers. Often Social Security, medical record numbers, health insurance beneficiary numbers, account numbers, things like that might be verbally applied, or we might actually catch that as the agent types it in during screen capture. There are things that we have to be relatively aware of in that. URLs are quite possible if the agent is looking up something for a person. And then, of course, IP address numbers, because a lot of the information that a lot of these contact centers now work on VoIP. So Internet Protocol IP addresses for voice calls are often information that we capture. These other items we might get in the future, and it might be as we collect more data we might be involved with that. But in general, these are the things today that we have to be aware of. Now, the next area would be PCI-DSS. So you probably use that acronym quite a bit and have no clue what it means. It's actually a payment card industry data security standard. It was actually created by a security standards council that involves people from Amex, Carte Blanche, MasterCard, Visa, banks. So, and what they've done out of this is they've created more controls around card holder data to reduce credit card fraud. And in order to be PCI-DSS compliant, you have to go through compliance that is performed annually, either by an external assessor or a firm that works with that creates a report, or through self-assessment questionnaire. Now, all of these things really apply to our end-user customers that use our product, but in general, there are things within the PCI-DSS requirements that they look to us to deal with. For example, build and maintain secure networking systems. We are a part of that, so we actually have to be understand what the secure network is. This involves some of our encryption. We will talk more about this. We need to protect the cardholder data. For us, a lot of times it's actually pausing recordings or redacting, or pausing screen capture. The maintain a vulnerability management program, they often look at us as to what we are supply to them in terms of measures for preventing vulnerable attacks. They also want strong access control measures, which is something that we put into our system. And then also the other items where they monitor and test and keep an information security policy. We often provide input to that just from our technical data. Now, and there are some things within the call center that we probably want to be aware of, and that a lot of the PCI-DSS focus is on back-end storage and then access to that data that's been collected, and there's very little about front-end collection. And quite frankly, call recording, as it's occurring, is vulnerable to skimming or hacking. Now, this hasn't happened to us, but it is something that we are fully aware of, and so when we create deeper access control lists, two-factor authentication, that we also do masking, suppression, pausing, redaction, being able to take things out or putting tone over it, allows for whatever we do save that is not going to be, even if it is hacked, if it should be hacked, it's useless information. So these are the types of things that we look at on a regular basis. Now, I know a lot of people have been saying, well, these are all things that we've known about. They've been around for a while. Well, back in May, there was the introduction of GDPR. And this is the European Parliament adopted the GDPR back in 2016, and then it was required to be implemented as of May 25th of this year. And it actually goes further in some cases than HIPAA and PCI-DSS and personally identifiable information, and it is very specific to the European Union. However, any time that we deal with anything that is a EU person or EU citizen and is transactions that occur within the EU, we have to be aware of it. Now, we have a big partner in Altitude that does sell into the European Union, so it has become more prevalent to us to make sure that we understand what's going on. Now, GDPR is different than HIPAA in that it actually sets some additional standards and capabilities, and the things that are most important to us as it goes forward are these areas. And that's the understanding what is the lawful basis for processing that information. And in that particular case, there is, like within the PSAP or the same functions in the European Union, there are there are things that are okay for us to collect based on it's based on the laws of the land. But in that, we still have to understand what it is that when we're not in a PSAP, if we're in a contact center, there are things that we can and cannot do that. Can and cannot do. And that includes understanding the consent data protection officer role, and we might actually have to, the customers might actually have to provide him with access to our information. So that would be an administrative environment that would allow them to see what's going on. There is also the right of erasure, which is something fairly new to us. We don't tend to erase unless it's past a certain limit. What has happened is that within GDPR, an individual user has the right to say, I don't want any of my information in your system. So that's become a new point of contention for us, and that we actually have to erase information towards a specific person. So that puts a lot of information, a lot of onus on the information that we do collect, so that we understand we are identifying the right person and removing them. It also has to do with how we log. Now, in GDPR, the types of information that are protected, it includes things like basic identifying information, name, address, ID numbers, but it also can be location, which is something that we tend to do, IP addresses, and even things like cookie data and RFID tags. There's also health and genetic data, biometric data, racial and ethnic data, even political opinions and sexual orientation. Those are all the types of things that GDPR covers. GDPR was quite a shock to the system in general, but now that we're 6 months into it, people are getting kind of settled in. And you will note that even U.S. companies have, as a result of wanting to err on the side of caution, have sent out emails you probably have gotten in that says, we collect this data, you do have the right to have it removed. And they're doing that even for people that aren't EU citizens. I mean, I personally got 15 different emails saying, as a result of GDPR, we're establishing higher levels. So that type of thing has moved far beyond what is already in place in the U.S. So it does influence us, and it is something that as purveyors of our product need to stay aware of. Now, within the U.S., there is also inconsistency, if you will, in privacy laws state by state. So in this, what you're looking at in this particular chart of the states, the darker the color, the stronger the privacy protection laws. For those of us who live in California, we probably have the highest number of anyone in terms of privacy protection, and the lighter color ones like Wyoming, Mississippi, have the weakest privacy protection laws, and they vary into what it is that they want to do. Now, for this presentation, for this webinar, I tried to put in all the information that Comparitech had looked at. It proved to be beyond the realm of possibility for putting on a single chart, and it certainly was beyond the realm of reasonableness for anyone to consume in a short webinar. If you would like information and or the links to what each of these states does, I can. If you send me a note, I'll be glad to send you the web link to Comparitech. That allows you to get the information about what they do and do and don't do with regards to privacy laws. But I felt like this was the best way to present all this information. Now, within this last year, there are certain things that have come true from Comparitech that are important for everybody to know. Every state in the union now has a law requiring companies to disclose when data breach occurs. Now, that data breach could be in their CRM systems, or it could be if, for heaven forbid, our system is hacked, our platform is hacked. And many states have expanded the definition of what is considered personally identifiable. And that, and where they've done that is including more types of data and combinations of data, so that personal identifiable information can be more interesting in terms of the small bits of data that all come together and make up a persona that is you. As you probably saw in the last election, there were an awful lot of people that were taking Facebook information, Instagram information, even Twitter information, and creating personas. Well, they actually have made that harder, and it's not general personas. They actually can bring it right down to an individual person, and that's what these laws are trying to protect. And as I pointed out, California has the toughest laws in the nation with regards to privacy and data protection. Interestingly enough, Maine is the only state to pass a law prohibiting law enforcement from tracking a person's location using GPS or other geolocation info in smartphones or computer. Illinois and California have tried that, but they've been vetoed. In Maine, that's an interesting twist, and as you know, part of what we can do is collect and store GPS or geolocation information as a part of what we would collect in a record that we would pull out for an interaction. So it's interesting that law enforcement can't track using GPS now in Maine. The last one is Illinois is trying specifically to protect biometric data, but this particular law, as it currently stands, is in jeopardy. But I imagine that we will see more efforts to protect biometric data going forward, and it'll be interesting that as our platform evolves, if we start to pick up more of that type of information as a part of an interaction, then we'll have to address that going forward. So, at this point, we've covered a lot of different things. We've covered PII, we've covered HIPAA, we've covered PCI-DSS, we've covered GDPR, and we've covered state privacy laws. Now the question is, how is it that we, HigherGround, deal with that? And that's actually the next piece. And we're going to break this down into how we collect data, how we transmit data, how we store data, how we provide protection to access to that data, how we provide copies of that data, and how we forget data. Now, I may not do this quite in that order, but as we go through, we will talk in fairly good detail as to what we can accomplish. So the first one is collecting data. Now, there are several things that we can do quickly that allows for us to be able to either save or not save or have it ready for deletion. And the things that, like within, for example, within the API, so you can, using our API from a console or other system, you can pause, resume, and restart recordings. So if that agent or dispatcher knows that the information that's coming through is going to be PII, they can pause the system. And then they can restart it if they need to after that information's gone, so that you collect the recording, but you don't necessarily capture the information that is subject to these laws and these regulations. We also, if a certain window title or type of window opens, for example, it happens to have the title account information, we can detect that within our screen capture, and that actually can cause us to not only stop screen capture but also stop the recording until the person manually restarts the recording. We also can save specific media based on the metadata. And for example, in Europe, we actually have to do what's called random sampling of campaigns. So if it is a campaign and they say I can only collect 10% of the recordings, we actually have a random number generator that will actually only pick up 10% of the recordings of everything that's within that campaign, that's been marked within that campaign. Those are the types of things that we can do with metadata that make things work for us. So, of course, we can manually start and stop recording from different places, and we can also identify for special handling, which means that if it needs to be deleted, we can do it right away. Now, with regards to storing data, there are three areas that are important to us. One is encryption, and when we encrypt, we have multiple ways of encrypting. One of the keys is we use AES-256, and that is a standard encryption environment. We also have a non-standard methodology, which is very hard to break. It's called blowfish. And typically customers don't use that, but it is available should someone want a level of encryption that is virtually unbreakable. There is a challenge with that, in that if you lose your password and you can't remember it, you're not getting back in. So there are some challenges with that, but in general, AES-256 is what we use for encryption. We also have a lot of fault tolerance built in to make sure that we are storing it properly, that we don't lose data, and we also do replication and redundancy. Now, you would think, ironically, that all of that would be something you would not want to do, when you're trying to protect private data, but the reality is that we actually do have to protect this data, and we have to make sure that it is proper, that it is non-reputable, and so that if we do have to go erase it, we are certain we are getting everything as it is appropriate. Now, obviously, with encryption, there's also we can transmit encrypted data. There are ways, if even a file, you can encrypt a file for export that is can only be played back by using our system or a cut down version of our system, or we can transmit data out in standard files, and we will get to more of that later. Now, with regards to protecting access to data, there are things that we have done traditionally, like access control lists, but now recently we've added multi-factor authentication. In fact, now you can set it up that if you log in, you actually have to have, you put in your login, your password, and you press enter. It sends a text to your phone with a authorization factor, which you then have to plug in into the third area in order to get in. This type of multi-factor authentication makes it much harder for hackers to get to the information, and it is becoming fairly standard everywhere in terms of access to database. We've already implemented it for the browser as well as accessing it to any data off the database. And then, of course, access control lists, as usual, we can do it by user profile, we can do it by role, we can do it by department or division. There are specific access control lists which would allow people to get to some information, not get to other information. You can restrict certain functions and capabilities. There are all sorts of things where we can limit a user through the use of access control lists. Now, one of those things that is fairly new to us, and that is the forgetting data. With GDPR, we have to be able to make things disappear. Now, traditionally, we did redaction, where we would just redact that information out, like the audio out of a recording, so that it can't be heard, or you could put a tone over it, or you could scramble it. But now, with GDPR, if there's anything in there that is associated with a particular person, say a particular phone number, they now have to be allowed, that you now have to, if they ask for it, you have to delete whatever you have collected. And more importantly, you can't log the fact that you deleted the information. So we've actually had to build in multi-level capabilities that allows for the non-logging of the deleted file. And that can only be done by an authorized administrator. And in this particular case, when we set that authorized administrator up, if you remember, we had the data protection officer. And that's the guy that would be the one that would do that within an organization. So we've had to make changes to our platform to be compliant with GDPR to meet these particular types of environments. And then finally, there's providing copies of data. Part of GDPR says I can want to see everything that you have on me. So we actually can collect all the different files that we may have recorded of someone and export them either as media files or just give them a record, a tabular list of everything that we've done for them and export it as a CSV file. Those things can be provided unencrypted, so that they actually can listen to it and decide what they want to do with it. These are things, again, that we've had to provide as a part of GDPR. So we've reached the end of the part where I talk a lot and into the part where, are there any questions?
Hey, Tom, it's Russell.
Yes.
Really good overview. And I guess I'm probably not the first one to tell you this this is extremely complex. And I can't even imagine for our developers trying to do all this stuff. It's crazy. But what it sounds like, in summary to me, is based on a customer's particular environment and particular needs for recording. And we all know that it varies, right, from customer to customer, industry to industry, et cetera, we can somewhat, it sounds like we have all the tools in the tool bag to do whatever it is that's needed to protect the customer. Is that a safe summary?
Yes, that's relative. That's a relatively good summary. I will point out that things change from customer to customer, so we will often get requests of things that we may or may not be able to do, and we often have to look at the broader scope. And this is something that, as we go forward with our platform development, we may look at controllable one-offs of things based on the customer requirements. It's not something we want to do because it actually creates more and more versions of software that we have to test and be attracted to. But with a lot of these things that are coming up, especially internationally, we're actually having to start to take a hard look at how we address those things. But yes, it is complex. Yes, we do have the tools mostly available, and yes, we will continue to look at future requirements and do what we can to comply to those, and hopefully avoid the complexity being handed to the customer.
Yeah, it's remarkable, and I'm thinking about, for example, in our world, dealing with partners and the partners' customers. So now you're on webinars, you're in meetings, you're taking notes, you've got different people from different disciplines, different pieces of data, phone numbers, emails, URLs, all the things that you mentioned in the training. Stuff's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's going to be, it's really remarkable what's required here. But, getting this insight and overview is valuable to us. I appreciate it.
All right. You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, thank you to everyone who was involved. We are recording this, and I will be stopping the recording now. And what we will do once we stop the recording is we will actually export this and put it up on the partner portal as well as in YouTube for future viewing if you need to go back and look at it. And thank you, everyone.